I'm Jim Kunkle. Joining me today is Scott MacArthur. Scott, welcome.
Hi, Jim. It's really lovely to speak to you finally after all these months of supporting each other on LinkedIn.
Yeah, you and I have a common bond in the science fiction, and that's what we're going to be talking about on this broadcast today. Scott, before we go into our conversation about the importance of science fiction, the envisioning the future and why the world needs science fiction, could
Yeah.
you provide your professional background?
Professional background. Well, I guess, and there is a link to science fiction, which we'll probably come back to, but I started my professional career off actually as a scientist. I researched arthritis and bone disease and anthrax bacilli, believe it or not. So that's where I started. I then took a jump from human remains and I actually went into human resources. So it was quite an odd jump. Couldn't survive in a scientist pay, so I had to get out and go into a proper job, if you like. And I ended up working in human resources for 15 years, finishing off as an HR director. That took me into the world of big consulting. I worked for one of the big consulting companies, KPMG, a French company called Atos, and that took me around the world. Fantastic. I loved it. And then 10 years ago, my partner and I decided that we wanted to leave the world of big consulting and start our own business. So been doing that for nearly 12 years now, doing mainly professional speaking, quite a lot of consulting. Call myself a professional storyteller these days, Jim. So that's in a nutshell, that's what I do.
Yeah, that's how we really became introduced to each other. Your broadcasts are amazing. I love how your production quality is amazing, but the topics and how you really cover those topics is just so impactful, and it really caught my attention early on. And I try to catch every broadcast. If not, I at least catch the replay of your live streams that you do. And you broadcast over across many different platforms. Scott, the first question I would have for you, and then I'm going to cover my story related to science fiction. What was the catalyst that got you involved into really being a fan and a follower and really a consumer of science fiction?
Well, like I think quite a lot of people in the United Kingdom, it was Doctor Who, because back when I was growing up, when I was a child in the 70s, there was only 3 channels here, and on a Saturday night, Doctor Who would come on, and it was like I was living in a rural part of Scotland at the time, and this world where they walk into a police box and they go exploring all these different parts of the time or the universe. It was just amazing, and it was terrifying. It was funny. So that was it. I was hooked, and that took me to Captain Scarlet and the Mr. Ons, and that took me to Space 1999, and then Star Trek. And that was it. Dunk, Star Trek. And it's been part of my life ever since. And I got into reading it probably at university when I was studying in Edinburgh. Sci-fi and fantasy became my thing because my roommates were into it. I'd never read Tolkien before. I'd never read any of the great Asimov books, and it was really then when I got really passionate about Foundation, etc., which we might talk about later. But that was how I got into it. In a nutshell.
You and I, again, more commonality that we have. So, my story, I was raised as a young child into early teens by my grandparents. My grandmother was born in 1918 in Western Pennsylvania here. And she, in the 30s and into the early 40s, before the war started for my grandfather, she started to attend the movies, and she would see the Flash Gordon movies, the serials they would run, and then they would run other ones too as well that were kind of science fiction themed. So she got really hooked into science fiction. And as a young child, she would have books for me to read. And I started my first real book, and it's still my favorite. I still think about it. I wish I could live in that. And that story is The Martian Chronicles. That was first introduction that she had with me. And I was born in 1966. In 1977, my grandmother and I attended the premiere of Star Wars in Pittsburgh. Wow. And she was just absolutely amazed to see the visual effects and the storyline. And she said, this is nothing like, because her and I, we would watch those 1950s and 1960s science fiction movies, with the really bad, special effects and, the wires and things like that. And the dialogue, not the greatest dialogue or anything like that. Yeah. But Star Wars blew her mind. And then as an adult, when I would have her over my home, and when the Peter Jackson trilogy came out with the Fellowship and the Two Towers and the Return of the King, I would have her watch that. Wonderful. And I would make her watch the extended version, the 4-hour ones. Yes. And it just, again, the quality of the special effects and the dialogue and everything. And she said, my God, it's just amazing to see what I experienced as a young woman to today as a senior, just to see the changes. And then the other thing that she was always amazed with too is technology. When I got my first flip phone, I got my first, cell phone, let's say more modern cell phone, and showing her the internet. And those were things that, she really kind of, dreamed about, because she's seen it in science fiction, and, it all started to come to reality and everything like that. Myself, I'm also a big Star Trek. I'm more of a classical Star Trek and the Next Generation as well. Yeah. And then for movies, Star Wars has always been a big thing for me. But, I love a lot of the movies like Blade Runner and a lot of those ones that kind of envision the future. And that's kind of what we want to kind of talk about today. Yeah. Yeah. Let's talk about the history of science fiction. And from most scholars, and please correct me if you have anything additional on this, but based off my research, it seems like everyone kind of focuses on the 1800s, the late 1800s, when you had H.G. Wells coming out with the War of the Worlds, which is one of my favorite classic science fiction.
Superb.
Yeah. But with research, when you really look into it, you have the late 1800s, then you get into the 1930s and 1940s. That's when really more of the classic modern, let's call it modern science fiction, really kind of kicked in, and it's grown since then. But a lot of evidence shows that we're looking at more around 1500s, where you had a lot of stories that were produced and then also written that had that flavor or flair of science fiction. Yes. Now, science has always been the innovation for science fiction. And so when you look at modern science fiction, it ties in a lot of things related to technology, political, social, and also the living condition. And it really kind of portrays what a potential future could be. It could be a dystopian future, or it could be a very, Elysium. It could be a very pleasurable or a good experience. And, I think when we look at science fiction, it really does help us kind of focus as to what we want to achieve later in life and as a species as well. What are your thoughts related to the history of science fiction?
Well, I think you could make a case to say it goes even further back than the 15th century, because if you look at how, and it would be linked to early incarnations of religiosity across the world. Because, things like the sun, the stars, the stars were burning fires, the stars formed shapes and could influence the world, and the gods lived in the stars. And so I think, things that you see in the 70s, like Ursula Le Guin, etc., were echoing, I think, the handprint on the wall type of stuff. So I do think it's been obviously it wouldn't be called science fiction because the word science hadn't even been invented at that point, but the notions of using I almost see science fiction, Jim, I don't know if this is right, but it's like an applied imagination. It's like I say I'm a junkie. I'm a wonder junkie. I look at something and I go, wow, and then from that you get the stories. And I think that for me as a Scot as well, because in Scotland there are ancient stones with runes, and there are ancient star maps that you can still touch. They're not behind a wall. You can connect. So I think that was the earliest of the writers who were using their imagination, which we would now reverse call it science fiction. And then I guess in the late 1800s, as you said, was when, Fritz Lang and others started to take some of the classic stories and make them into books and films. And then obviously there was an explosion of it. No pun intended, but just during the war, because people were imagining, both sides were imagining the other side had these wacky, amazing, killing machines, and that started people writing about them and making things up. And then on it went. And I love the fact that the thing I love about it is that it allows you, it gives you permission to go beyond. It just gives you the permission to go beyond. And, there are some, I'm not a Star Wars fan. That might surprise you. I'm not. I don't think George Lucas is a very good filmmaker, apart from the one film, the second one, which he didn't make, was the one I like. And I quite like some of the later ones. But that's because I think we all, this is the great thing about science fiction. Doesn't matter. We all like different things. I prefer, Babylon 5 to Star Trek. And there's a reason for that, but I think when you meet science fiction people who really think about it, like I know you do, there's always something to talk about, and there's always a challenge or what do you think of that idea? And the final thing I'll say is that I think the tables have almost turned. Used to be that science created science fiction. It's quite an argument that science fiction is creating a lot of science now. We're working on space elevators, we're working on machine brain interfaces, and these are all, Arthur Clarke, ideas, or, Heinemann or whoever ideas. That's amazing. I just love it.
Yeah, you can find so many examples of that. And I must apologize because I don't have the inventor's name, but the gentleman who patented the flip phone, basically. That was an inspiration from Star Trek, from the classic Star Trek on the communicators where they flipped open. And when you really look at those early flip phones, they kind of look like the communicator. Yeah. And so you find a lot of that. And, you threw out Babylon 5. That's another great series that I love as well. And then with earlier, you had mentioned about Doctor Who. And I think with Doctor Who, that really kind of opened up my mind a lot related to time and space, and then also consequences that can happen as well. Yeah. I was introduced in 1975, WOR in New York City. We had just gotten cable television, and we had the channel from New York that would come into Pittsburgh, and they on Saturday mornings, they would have Doctor Who. So 1975, my doctor is Tom Baker. And
mine too. John Pertwee and Tom Baker. That's my two.
And my grandmother made me a Tom Baker Doctor Who scarf that went on forever. And then she would buy me, they were jelly beans, but
babies.
Yeah, there'd be the jelly babies. And then I also, she found the Doctor Who, Tom Baker Doctor Who hat, and I would wear that. Yeah. Excellent. As a kid. And it was big. It was adult size, but it was kind of cool to be able to dress up like my hero, Doctor Who, Tom Baker.
Yes.
And so it really, for me with science fiction, to your point, it really does envision the future. And I think the science fiction is leading to a lot of technological advances. We have Elon Musk with SpaceX, we have Bezos with, his venture. You have a lot of different inventors and billionaires that are looking into getting into space. And then also, too, we see the human condition changing as we consider leaving the planet. Now, all of a sudden, maybe we can look to a mineral-rich asteroid belt to be able to help the human condition. But also, my opinion has always been a survival for the human race is to get off the planet, because if we're spread out, less chance of a single asteroid doing the dinosaur on us. So
I was very fortunate. I don't know if you've seen the episode. I actually interviewed Robert Zubrin, who was the founder of the Mars Society, and he actually advises Elon Musk. And he came on my show, and it was amazing having a man like that, because he spent his life in the sort of theorizing about Mars and thinking about propulsion, and there's a word, I don't know if it translates. He's quite quirky, he's quite an unusual fella, but his enthusiasm for it and his passion for it is like, we need more of that. And I think that one of the other things that as an incidental, people reading science fiction often end up working in science.
Yeah.
And I think, again, that's why I love seeing the new Star Treks and the new Lord of the Rings and all these things, because it encourages people to do things that if they don't know about it, how they're going to find out about it. And of course, if you do it through the popular media, it's a start. I mean, the guy I've got up here, Carl Sagan, he's my hero, and he was ridiculed by the scientific community for trying to communicate science better. And he kept going, and he changed the world because he got so many people to go into science. And he wrote, obviously, his very final book was Contact, which they made a brilliant film for. And that film has had a huge impact. And it's why I can't wait for us to go to the moon. I can't wait for us to go to Mars, because it'll change the world. It'll encourage more and more people to, one, read science fiction, but two, get into the sciences and do something with it. And by equity, we need more people in that field at the moment, so it's got so many positive outcomes. I just love the thing. I think science fiction is amazing.
Yeah, his series Cosmos was just absolutely mesmerizing at the time, and it really kind of, in that time frame, we had the Voyager missions going into the outer planets, and we were really starting to learn so much about science and the universe. And at that time, we suspected there were planets. Today, we have a lot of different methodologies to be able to predict where planets are and kind of validate that there are planets now with the James Webb's telescope. Hopefully we're going to be able to do some type of radio type of signal imaging of an actual planet that might be only a dozen light years away, and that will totally change our reality if we really can see a physical photograph or something.
There was one published last week, actually. The first one's already been taken a photograph of it. It's only 3 or 4 pixels, but they've got one, and that, as you say, is I don't think the public imagination is quite caught up with the reality of that yet, because they take it for granted. But I mean, when Sagan did Cosmos, he postulated in that series maybe there are planets around all these stars, and of course now we've I think it's more than 4,000 now. They're rhyming them off, and but they're even talking about interstellar spectroscopy, where they can actually analyze what's on in the atmospheres of these planets. I mean, it's mind blowing. It's so exciting, and books like Foundation, etc. They touched on that. So yeah, it's a field that I can only see getting more exciting, Jim. Can only see getting it much more exciting.
Yeah, and the impact, that's the next topic we should kind of really cover is, what's the impact of science fiction on society, political impact, our personal, how we relate to each other, and then I think the other thing's going to be for the future when it comes to technology, and for me, I think what science fiction really has prepared humans for is the reality that there is going to be a day where we discover or we have some evidence of life. There could be a reality that maybe with the distances of the universe, we can never actually visit another alien species or have them visit us. And I've always thrown out there that probably, and I think with the first Star Trek movie with V'ger, we might actually not have a physical contact with biological life. It might be a machine life.
Yes.
So it's going to be interesting if we have a probe or we have some type of intelligent artificial intelligence or machine that actually we come in contact with first. What are some of the things and impacts that you see for mankind?
Well, I think, again, you touched on that's the Rama books, the Arthur Clarke books are all about that, where the cigar-shaped spacecraft appears in the sky. And I think that is something that, wow, can you imagine that? It would be incredible. But I guess for me, there are 2 planets in our solar system that are populated. There's the Earth and there's Mars. Mars is populated by robots, right? And so, there are two here. And that for me is almost enough at the moment, because the distances are so barbaric. People don't understand the distances. I don't think I understand the distances. It's so difficult to get your head around the distances.
It is. Yeah.
But the excitement for me is that it's a frontier. And what I love about science fiction, and you mentioned earlier about dystopian and utopian ways of writing science fiction, and there's things like, a lot of science fiction will take an idea and extend it. It'll take like the mobile phone, and they'll make it like the Voyager story was like that, wasn't it? That was about the Voyager coming back, but it had grown arms and legs and became this huge thing that was looking for its home. And I think that sort of thing excites me, because it's like, if you look at what's happening today in our world, where we're now, more and more of us are doing this sort of thing. Well, there's been science fiction written about that for decades. In fact, over 100 years, there's been science fiction getting written about that. But from your lens, about some of those science fictions are dystopian, some of those science fictions are utopian, and actually neither of those work if you look at it. So I think it helps you think through things. It certainly helps me, and when I talk to people about things like different subjects, like I talk about science and technology and engineering and gardening, and I bring them all together, and I'll say to somebody, can you imagine if we could grow trees that glowed at night, and we could replace all the lamps in the world with trees? Well, they're actually doing that. And that to me is so exciting. So when I see something in a sci-fi movie, I think, I wonder. And off you go, and you find that there's a little kernel of truth in quite a lot of the ideas. And I think that's really, the current issues like diversity and inclusion, Ursula Le Guin was writing about that in the 1970s, big time. Mm-hmm. And so it's all there in the canon. And for me, I get, maybe it's for another time, but I get really frustrated when people say, there's nothing to science fiction. There is a lot of pulp science fiction, mainly from the 40s and the 50s, but a lot of the harder science fiction, as they call it, is actually really helpful for thinking about how we live in this in today. So it works both ways, as I think we both said earlier. That's how I think about it.
Yeah, there can be science fiction that's more pure entertainment. A lot of explosions and aliens and spaceships and things like that, and it just kind of satisfies that hunger. And then there's the deeper, the more cerebral type of science fiction. And when we really look at science fiction, let's go ahead and talk about the our top three novels or books. Let's say, Scott, is it okay if I go first?
Of course.
Excellent. So my first book that really was big, in fact, and I mentioned about the Martian Chronicles, and it's on my list. That's number 2. But for me, the first book that was very impactful, and my grandmother did read to me as well, is H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds. And the reason why I picked that book was because H.G. Wells seemed to be so far ahead of his time. It was like he was tuned into something. And a lot of people say that maybe science fiction writers, or maybe even humanity, we have all this knowledge in our head of what is, but it's not released to us. And that science fiction writers, the really good quality science fiction writers, they have a way to tap into that. And I think there's great examples of that in some of in fact, you're going to talk about Isaac Asimov. He seemed to be dialed into that forbidden knowledge of the future, let's say that, right? Of what is the potential, what could be. Well, with H.G. Wells, what I thought was amazing with The War of the Worlds, you're talking about an invasion from Mars that comes to Earth, and how mankind can resist, but also come together to fight against this invasion. And it really kind of precursed the world wars, if you think about it. Because now all of a sudden you have a global conflict, and it is in some cases impossible. You have technologies that are being used that are just catastrophic. And World War I was a great example of that, where you had gas attacks, you had shelling, you had, now also you had the introduction of new technologies such as tanks, flamethrowers, airplanes to some extent that could cause carnage as well. And then the mass scale of war. So with H.G. Wells and the War of the Worlds, you saw that global conflict. The other thing is you saw something as simple as bacteria that defeated the Martians. Not all the weapons, not all. It was the simplest thing of bacteria. And what I liked about the book, when you really think about it, as each generation survives, and my family, both sides of my family are from Europe, so we survived plagues and other types of diseases that happen. And my grandfather always said, my grandfather was from Russia. He always said that your ancestors, that they survived, and some died. They made you stronger. You're here today because of them. And when I think about War of the Worlds, and especially how the bacteria took down the Martians, I really realized that, no matter how much technology we have or anything like that, sometimes it can be something as simple as bacteria that can really change and make the day. My second book was really a collection of stories, and this is the one my grandmother would really read to me a lot. I still read the book over and over. There was TV series with it and things like that. Is The Martian Chronicles from Ray Bradbury. And I really loved those stories. And when I was a young kid, I just imagined myself being on Mars. And when a couple of the rovers had gone, really the rovers and some of the surveying landers and things like that, NASA would have this thing where you could go onto the website and you could submit your name.
Yeah.
And they would take your name digitally, put it into some type of a chip that would go on the lander and land there, so that hopefully a future generation, when we colonize Mars, goes to the historical site of the global surveyor that's on the ground there. Maybe they can actually pop up and look for your name. So maybe I have a future ancestor. Well, would it be an ancestor? A future, family member that will go and see, James D. Kunkle listed and on several of the landers and things like that, and the rovers as well. Wonderful. And I think the story, what I liked about it was how it kind of talked about social topics.
Yeah.
It also really did cover racial equality. Also, when it comes to different statuses of classes, and the interaction also with, treating the Martians were treated harshly, the ones that were survivors, but also too, ultimately at the end, the surviving humans, after the Earth had been destroyed, those surviving humans on Mars became the new Martians.
Yeah.
And so there was still hope in the face of total destruction. My last would be a novel series, and that's going to be the Expanse novels. And those are written by Daniel Abram and Ty Frank, and they go under the joint name of James S.A. Crowley. And what I like about the Expanse is I think it's more based on our current reality, where, as a society, we're growing, but we have a lot of challenges. We have a lot of issues. Climate change, how we treat the resources that we have, class struggles and things like that. And in the story, the best way to look at it is the moon is colonized and you have Mars colonized. They become their own kind of entities in a way. Moon is aligned to Earth. Mars is more independent, which I really would envision in the future. Mars probably will be defiant because it is the red planet. So probably the humans living on Mars will view themselves as Martians. And then you have people who live in the asteroid belt that do all the mining for materials and everything like that. And in the storylines, they're kind of belittled a little bit, but they have a rise to power because of events that happen, and a gateway that takes you into other universes from an alien society. So I really those are my three books and novels. What are yours?
How can I top those three absolute classics? Terrific. I think that when you asked me to think about this, I thought, well, if you'd asked me to have 300, it would be much easier than having three. So I've chosen ones that are at the front of my brain at the moment. And the first one is part of a whole new movement out of China, where the Chinese science fiction writers have come to the world. It's something that hasn't really happened before. There's been little bits, but it's now coming almost as a wave of, it's a movement, if you like. And that the book is called The Three Body Problem by Qinxing Liu. I think that's how it's pronounced, Qinxing Liu. I think I might have that wrong because it's difficult, but and it's a difficult one to summarize. I mean, you summarize those books very well, but this one's about. We think initially it's like advanced artificial intelligence, where one of the characters enters into this world using basically it's called a V suit, but it's a haptic suit that you can imagine as developing these haptic suits. There are people working on them now, and it takes them into this game. And the game turns out a bit like Ender's Game. It turns out that it's actually real. And by sending this, by playing this game, we have in effect notified this other civilization that we exist. And this other civilization decides, yep, we want to come to Earth. But because of the tyranny of distance, it's going to take them 400 years to come to Earth. So Earth has to work out how to respond to that potentially aggressive civilization coming to Earth. What we're going to do about it. So that's what the story is about, and it's about how the people in the other place send things through technology to Earth to damage science, to hold back science, so that the Earth people can't progress science to fend them off in the future. So that's the first one, Three Body Problem. Definitely hard sci-fi, and it takes a bit of getting into, but it's a really good book. And I'm actually just reading the second book just now, so I don't know where it's going to go, but it's a really interesting book.
I'm going to have to read that.
Really interesting. It's really challenging, but it's really there's multiple storylines. But I think I've summarized it reasonably well. Then the second one, which has become more popular because it's been on the Disney Channel, is Foundation by one of the greats, Asimov. And Foundation was one of the earliest ones that I read, and the reason for that was because it's about. There's a number of storylines, but it's fundamentally about cloning, and it's about the cloning of a royal family and how they succeed in producing the same emperor, if you like, every year, every decade, every generation, through cloning. And it begins, you have the elder emperor, the emperor, and the junior emperor are all living at the same time. So it talks about, intergenerational relationships and how they work. And then it talks about how the emperors control the part of the universe that they're located in. And then it has this wonderful juxtaposition with scientific progress and how science can predict certain things are going to happen in the future. And there's a character who predicts the end of the empire. And that becomes the theme of the stories. So it's our lovely, again, quite similar, I guess, to Three Body Problem, but it's it was grounded in biology, and I was studying biology at the time at university, which is why I was recommended it by a friend of mine called Andrew. So I read it like a long time ago, probably early, like 91, maybe 92 is when I read that. So, and then the final one, I find it incredible. It's called The Machine Stops, and it's a short story by a very famous writer, E.M. Forster, but who's known for writing, like Merchant Ivory type stories, about India and about, the rise of, the British Empire, etc. But he also wrote these short stories, and The Machine Stops was written in 1909. That was the year that Tolstoy died, and it's all about how this civilization has reverted underground because there's been so much pollution on the surface of this planet. And they're all living in little pods on their own, communicating with each other using technology, spending most of their time sharing secondhand thinking with each other, and never coming together to meet even family members. And they only ever they reproduce through non-contact. The surface is basically hell. They're not allowed to go to the surface, and it's about a relationship between a father and son, a mother and son, and how they change that. I won't tell you anything else. I don't want to spoil it. 1909. I mean, it predicted the internet. It predicted online learning. It predicted hybrid working. It predicted, unbelievable piece of science fiction. 1909. It's just a little book, but a wonderful book. So that's my three. That's my three. today. I've another 3 tomorrow, but that's my 3 today, Jim.
Yeah, and I agree with you what you said earlier about we could do probably top 300.
Oh yeah,
and then really have a day at it.
yeah.
Scott, before we close out this conversation related to science fiction, is there anything that you'd want to leave with the viewers?
I think some of the more challenging side, you touched on it actually, Jim. I think people sometimes should give some of the more challenging science fiction a go. And if you're concerned about, like we all are, the work of Ursula Le Guin, I would really recommend people to read her work, because I just find that, I mean, the Earthsea books are great, but some of the other books that she wrote, the Left Hand of God, and, you know, some of the other books are, I think they're astonishing. Honestly, I think they're astonishing, and they're so helpful for me, you know, trying to find my way through 2022, and yet they were written in the 70s. So that's probably what I would say, Jim. You know, read it, give it a try.
And for me, my advice is that you know, I talked a lot about classic science fiction. I think with the new and upcoming writers, authors, even with the short stories, you know, we've seen a lot of great impactful movies made from short stories. You know, when you were talking earlier about, you know, from 1910 and impacting and predicting, you know, the internet and working from home and all these other things like that, you know, you never know. And I think supporting these younger authors, newer authors who are going in. And then the other thing too, with independent publishing, I've actually had a chance to, through Amazon, buy books that were made by independent creators who don't have a big publisher behind them, and their stories are amazing. And a lot of them are science fiction, fantasy, and I really enjoy that. So I say, you know, give them a try as well. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Scott, I greatly appreciate this opportunity to have a conversation with you, and hopefully you and I can continue talking about some other science fiction topics in the near future.
There's a lot to get through, Jim.
There is. Well, everyone, thank you so much. I appreciate you tuning into this broadcast. And Scott, how can people get in contact with you, follow you?
The best way is on YouTube, and it's just Scott MacArthur, MC Arthur on YouTube. You type that in, you'll find me. My live broadcast is called ARTEFACTLive, that you kindly mentioned earlier. That goes out. A new series is starting, I think, next week or the following week, every Tuesday, UK time, 12:30 in the afternoon. And that's where we explore the importance of stories, and there's a lot of references to sci-fi on that show, as you can probably remember, Jim.
Oh, beautiful. And I highly recommend everyone to subscribe to Scott's YouTube channel, follow him on LinkedIn and any other social platforms he's on. And if you want to follow me, I do have a YouTube channel. If you just search under Jim Kunkle, Kunkle, you can find my YouTube channel. And also, too, LinkedIn. I do a lot of live broadcasting on LinkedIn and also Twitch as well.
Fantastic. Absolutely fantastic stuff you do, Jim. It's really good.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much. Scott, have a good rest of your day.
You too, Jim. Nice to speak to you.
All right, everybody. Have a good rest of your day as well. We'll talk to you soon.